What sets apart a professional from amateurs or hobbyists? Well, professionals have methods that they can follow in order to achieve whatever is asked from them. They don't rely on inspiration or motivation. If you ask them something, they will follow some processes and systems, and they will achieve whatever is asked from them. In this video, we are going to talk about a method that I developed to create enemies for my games. Note that each professional, each individual will have their own methods because they have their own creative process, but a professional understands the creative process that they must go through in order to achieve whatever is asked from them. So I will show you mine, and this can give you some directions in order to create your own. So let's get started. I have here the game design document for my game, and this game design document is evolving as time goes. And one of the things that I decided that I should do is to turn everything here into databases. I'm using Notion for that, and this gives me the ability to make cross references between each database. And one of them is the enemies database, which I can cross references with the locations database, the levels database, the characters database, and the mechanics database, so on and so forth. This gives me what I call an enemy sheet. An enemy sheet is basically a sheet that will give me all the data regarding a given enemy. So what is the purpose of this enemy? I split the purpose of my enemies into three major purposes. So they can be an Actric enemy, a conflict enemy, and a progress enemy. An Actric enemy is basically an enemy that is supposed to break the player's rhythm of movement. So players are moving towards a given goal, and these enemies basically appear. Players can ignore them or not. Ideally, players will never ignore your enemies because, well, enemies are meant to create conflict. If players can basically just ignore them and don't have the desire to face them, the drive to defeat them, these are bad enemies. A conflict enemy is an enemy that is preventing players from achieving their desired goal. So for instance, I can give a mission, a quest for a player, and on the goal of this quest, I can create an enemy that will try to prevent the player from accomplishing the quest. And I have progress enemies, which are kind of like a conflict enemy, but they are mandatory. Players must defeat them in order to complete the purpose experience of my game. So for instance, most of the progress enemies that I have on my game are bosses. This one in particular is an Actric enemy, and I'm using two archetypes for this particular enemy. It is a guard and a blocker. So if you don't know all of these archetypes, I think that I made a video about that, so I will recommend you to watch it. It's based on Scott Rogers' enemies archetypes, so I will not going to extend myself here, but each one of these have a particular behavior that we can combine to create more complex behaviors. I try to keep a maximum of 2 archetypes for my enemies because this will make it so that I can combine multiple enemies to create more complex behaviors instead of just make one enemy that is very complex. These multiple archetypes I save for bosses. So bosses usually have 3 to 4 archetypes merged together on them. Then I have the size of the monster. Medium means that it is about the size of the player character or the player avatar. In my case, about the size of the player's spaceship. A small enemy is half the size of the spaceship. A big enemy is twice the size of the spaceship. A huge enemy is more than twice the size. And an immense enemy is about the size of the whole screen. So players cannot see the entirety of immense enemies just on a single screen. They have to move to see the whole enemy. There are only 2 immense enemies in my game, so they are very, very huge. Then I describe the behavior. I add some concept art. Let me show you a boss here. So this particular boss, Ares, is a guard, bomber, chaser. So you can see that there are 3 archetypes in this case. It is a progress enemy. The purpose of this enemy is to block the player's progress on the narrative. Down here, I have the concept art for the battle. So the battle, Ares expresses his impulsiveness, which is a characteristic of the Ares character, which is different from the enemy sheet. So I have a character sheet for Ares that explains its personality, its gender, how it takes some decisions, so what is the cognitive process of taking decisions, and so on and so forth, and the personality traits as well. So Ares expresses his impulsiveness with rapid successive charges towards his target, destroying everything in his path, and we can see that it creates some explosions. Then I have here the health of this enemy, the damage per second that this enemy is supposed to deal to players, the type of movement, so I have the steal, which is basically an enemy that doesn't move, a linear, dash, dive, arc, sinusoid, which is basically a wave movement, and a zigzag movement as well. And I have the type of speed, so this enemy is fast, so fast is about twice as fast as the player, normal is about the same speed as the player's spaceship, slow is an enemy that is about half the pace of the player's spaceship, still is an enemy that doesn't move, and swift is about 4 times or more than the player's spaceship. Synergies is meant for enemies that are supposed to work together. This is not the case of Ares, since Ares is a boss. I have some enemies that have some synergies with other enemies. And down here I have the locations, the elements, so I have this element system in my game. So that's why I say that each game or each game designer will have its own enemy sheet, because it depends a lot of how is the game, what is the world building of this game, so on and so forth. I have some other properties here, but the major thing that we should pay attention to is this top part here, and especially the target mechanics that this enemy is supposed to work on players. So when we talk about enemies and some other mechanics in the game, we are trying to make the players exercise some skills, right? Because we have this flow state, and we should challenge the player in order to work their competence in the game. Each enemy and each mechanic, each level will try to work some mechanics more than others in order to teach the player or reinforce the player's ability in this specific mechanic. In this case, Ares will work on players' Star Blink, which is the teleport, and the Photon Buster, which is the shooting mechanic. By making this enemy sheet, we can have some insights about the game. So for instance, here on Notion, I created some graphics that shows me a visual representation of how these enemies are distributed on the game areas. So my game is a game where we have each area being the orbit of a given planet. We have some sections that are based on the distribution of each zodiac sign on the solar system. So it's kind of like a clock in that sense. I will show you in a moment. But here we can see that there are pretty even distribution, with the exception of Mars, Mercury, Venus, and Earth. Why so? Well, because here we have these particular enemies also playing a role of Actric in players, the Black Star employees. This is the underlying narrative of the game, so players are supposed to face a competitor of the company that they work for. So they work for the Milky Way Mailing Inc., and the major competitor in the solar system is the Black Star Express. We have this distribution right here, and something that we can think about is, why is Earth so easy? So we have only 2 enemies here with the regard of this default Black Star employee enemy, and one of them is a boss. I will probably have to tweak this a little bit, so this is an insight that we can have just with that. But we also have other insights. Particularly, I want to show you the mechanics distribution, because my game is a top-down shooter, right? So it's a shooter game. And well, as you can see, the major mechanic that enemies work on players are the shooting mechanic. And on second place, the teleport mechanic, which is one of the core differentials of my game. We can teleport. But on third place, enemies work the player's positioning, so the movement mechanic. I think that the movement is not something that I need to work with enemies in particular. I think that I could work more with other mechanics, so traps, hazards that players have to avoid, so on and so forth. I want that enemies really work the major selling points of my game, which is the recharging mechanic. On my game, you have to use the recharge mechanic to shift the behavior of the other default mechanics. So for instance, if you keep the recharge key pressed and you teleport, instead you are going to dash towards a given direction, which will increase your movement by 5 times the default movement speed. This is how this recharge is supposed to work. It's kind of like a mechanic that changes the default behavior of the others. And since my game has 12 power-ups, so 12 abilities that players acquire by defeating the bosses, this charging mechanic is how you can access these other behaviors, so these other power-ups. So I think that I should work more this on my enemies. I think that I should design enemies that better work the recharging competence of players. Other things that I can see just by having this enemy sheet is how is the distribution of the health. So we can see that most of my enemies, so 11 enemies, have about 5 health points. Players can deal 6 damage per second by default, so they can shoot 6 bullets and each bullet deals 1 damage. So we can think about how the gameplay will feel like just by understanding that most enemies have 5 health points, so players can defeat one enemy within 1 second. And we can distribute these enemies to create a rhythm graphic. So for instance, players defeat about this amount of enemies per second. This is something that we can create based on this data that we are looking here. And another interesting graphic is the archetype distribution. So most of my enemies are guard because every boss is a guard in this particular design. Apart from that, the second most used archetype in my enemies design are shooters. So it's a shooter game, so it kind of makes sense that you will face other enemies that also shoot. And in third place, we have a blocker, enemies that will block players' bullets. And I think that this is a good distribution to have. On top of that, I want to show you how we can use this to create enemies in our game. So based on the enemy sheet of this enemy right here, let me see if I can find it real quick. Mars Minion. The major behavior of this enemy is that when it detects that the player is within its sight, it will chase the player's spaceship, and when close enough, it will explode. So it's a bomber chaser. And based on that, I created this enemy right here, which is kind of like a blob. It can't contain itself, and if it doesn't eat whatever it's charging towards, it will explode of an insatiable hunger. This is the design behind this enemy. I know that it looks simple, but the design is a little more than it looks like. This matches perfectly the enemy sheet here, so we can kind of like tick each one of the requirements for the implementation of this enemy to see if the implementation in the game matches the desired behavior, which is expressed in this enemy sheet here. This enemy is supposed to test the player's teleport skills, as you can see here, target mechanic teleport. So the idea is that when it charges towards the player will have to teleport out. So let's find this enemy. Yeah, there we have it. So if I get close enough, it will explode, and I didn't teleport fast enough. So this is something that I didn't add here, which is the sight area of this enemy. So how far away can it attack players? I think that this is something that I can add there that will give some insights as well. So I'm going to increase this just so players have a broader reaction window for this enemy. Yeah, this enemy is way too fast, so I have to tweak this out as well, and probably I'll have to tweak how the behavior happens. So I think that maybe it will chase 3 to 4 times and then explode. Maybe it doesn't need to actually get close to the player in order to explode. So this is something that I can tweak out. And something also that we can work with is the distribution of these enemies along the spawn areas. Because since these enemies are supposed to be on Mars, I can think about how will be the distribution. And in this case, I set it up to be between 30 and 36 enemies around this Mars orbit here. So they will be distributed randomly within these segments here. And this will allow me to think about how many bullets players will shoot in order to clean up this area. And this will give me some insights about the pace of the game. So how many times players will have to recharge in order to clean up this area, and this will reinforce the player's competence on recharging, so on and so forth. So let's try to find some enemies on Mars, on the Mars area. So yeah, we are within the site, the spawn area, and I should find, yeah, there we have it. Oh, I didn't react fast enough. But there we have it. This is how I made 27 enemies in one morning. So I have this process. I set up how would be the system that I would use to design these enemies. So they have health, they have a speed, a movement type, they have archetypes that I can choose from, and I can project the behavior based on these archetypes, so on and so forth. So I designed 27 enemies within like 3 or 4 hours of work, closing up a project that I set for myself of designing 8 enemies on this previous month, August, allowing me to create everything within a single morning. And this is the major takeaway that I want you guys to take from this video. Create your design process so that you don't rely on being waking up with some inspiration of creating enemies or with the motivation to create these enemies. Well, just set up the enemy sheet, add whatever properties, so you will have to be really good at abstracting the properties that you need to work with in the design of your enemies, but you will be more likely to achieve the design of your specific game by having these processes on place, so that you can just sit your ass on the chair and work your way out of the problems that you have to solve. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more game design and game development content. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Keep developing, and until the next one. See you there.